In 1944, as German resistance collapsed in France and the Germans were in headlong retreat back to their western frontier defenses, Hitler issued a strange order. He decreed that a small German town in Swabia, in the southwest of the country, be made a French enclave, legally becoming French territory. So why did he do this? The reason had everything to do with the collapse of one of his erstwhile allies, Vichy France. When France surrendered to the Germans following a 6-week campaign in May to June 1940, the nation was split into two distinct entities. The north and west of the country were called the occupied zone, heavily garrisoned by German troops and governed entirely at the whim of the German occupation authorities. The south and east of the country was called the free zone, the zone libre, and officially called the French state. We know it from the name of its capital, Vichy France, and the name Vichy has become synonymous with collaboration, like another word from World War II, Quisling, the surname, of course, of the Norwegian collaborator Vidkun Quisling. The Germans allowed Vichy France to continue to exist as it was led by reactionary conservatives and pre-war fascists, and most of France's overseas colonies also declared for Vichy, so it administered most of the French Empire and its large armed forces. The president of Vichy France was the grand old man of the French military, Marshal Philippe Pétain, a hero of World War I, with Pierre Laval as vice president until succeeded by Admiral Jean Darlan. Pétain's government reversed the liberal policies that many French believed had caused France's defeat in 1940 and took tight control of the economy. The state was overtly anti-Semitic and actively assisted the Germans in rounding up and handing over to them tens of thousands of French and refugee Jews, as well as creating a highly political fascist-type state and assisting the Germans in recruiting Frenchmen for their war against the Soviet Union. Opposition to Vichy came primarily from the French resistance and General Charles de Gaulle's Free French based in England. In November 1942, the Germans took over the Free Zone following the lackluster performance of Vichy and French colonial troops in resisting the Operation Torch landings in North Africa, though the Vichy government remained in existence, exercising jurisdiction in metropolitan France. The Vichy government had raised a series of paramilitary and police organizations to fight the resistance and or terrorize its own citizenry, the most notorious of these being the milice or militia led by Joseph Darnand, a far-right collaborator and later a major in the Waffen-SS. The French resistance considered the milice, with its fluency in French and local knowledge, more dangerous than the Gestapo or the SS security police, and the organization was well known for its brutality and use of torture. It grew to some 30,000 members. Following the Allied landings in Normandy in June 1944, followed soon after by the landings in southern France, Operation Dragoon, the writing was clearly on the wall for German-occupied France. And without the Germans to prop it up, the Vichy regime was doomed as well. By mid-August 1944, the Vichy government was seeking ways to save itself. As the liberation of France continued, the head of the Vichy regime, Pierre Laval, tried to convince the Germans to place back in charge in France the last French parliament that had existed before the 1940 surrender. Laval thought this would prevent de Gaulle, whose Free French forces were fighting alongside the other allies, from assuming control of the nation, and some attempts were made to make this plan a reality. However, very pro-German French politicians complained directly to Berlin, and the Nazis aborted this plan. Laval and his 5 ministers and staff were instead escorted to Belfort in northeastern France close to the German border. But the Germans wanted the figurehead president of the French state sent to Belfort as well, and the old marshal refused. Hitler tried many times to get Pétain to go, and finally he was threatened. If he refused to go, the Germans would bomb Vichy. Pétain submitted, and on the 20th of August 1944, the marshal was escorted to Belfort as well. In the meantime, it had become clear that almost all of France would be given up as the Germans retreated to their western defences, and the Vichy government would need to be moved into Germany as well, still acting as a rallying point for French collaborators and other fellow travellers of the Germans, with many Frenchmen still serving in German military organisations, most notoriously the Charlemagne division of the Waffen-SS. With all this in mind, Hitler decided to give the Vichy regime a new base, and to make that base legally French territory, even though it was within Germany. Hitler chose the small town of Sigmaringen, dominated by its huge castle, the property of the Hohenzollern family, the imperial family of Germany until the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1918. This enormous castle contained the so-called French Hall, a huge dining room, among many other splendid rooms. The Gestapo ordered the owner, Prince Friedrich, who was from a branch of the Kaiser's family, to vacate the castle immediately, along with his wife, 7 children, and staff. Hitler had little love for the Hohenzollerns, personally disliking the Kaiser, who had died in exile in the Netherlands in 1941. And Hitler had passed a law in 1940 preventing imperial princes from serving in the German armed forces. Such was his loathing and distrust for Germany's former rulers and the other princely German families. The Vichy government ministers and their families were moved into the castle. Many buildings in Sigmaringen town were taken over or requisitioned to house the Vichy government departments, the remnants of its security forces, and other assorted French collaborators who had escaped from France. The notable figures now in residence were of course Marshal Pétain, the former French Prime Minister Pierre Laval, and the new Vichy president, the Marquis de Brinon, as well as Joseph Darnand, Defense Minister Eugène Brideau, and Minister of Labour and National Solidarity Marcel Déat. In total, Sigmaringen was full of thousands of Vichy officials, milice or hangers-on. These men were not inactive whilst inside Germany. Recruiting missions visited forced labour camps across Germany, attempting to recruit Frenchmen for the milice. The castle and many buildings in Sigmaringen were thus officially designated as French territory by the German government, receiving extraterritorial status, meaning the French were only subject to their own laws and regulations. In effect, Sigmaringen was a French colony in the midst of Nazi Germany. The Germans, in fact, opened an official embassy in Sigmaringen, followed by that of Japan. And Mussolini's rump Italian Social Republic, a puppet state set up by the Germans in northern Italy, also opened a consulate in the town. The Vichy officials reconstituted their government as the French Commission for the Defence of National Interests, more commonly known as the French Delegation. An official radio station was opened and a newspaper published. In total, it has been estimated that at the height of its existence, the Sigmaringen enclave included about 6,000 French, broken down into hundreds of Vichy officials and their dependents, 500 or so milice, 700 French SS, and many French forced labourers. However, with Marshal Pétain and his ministers refusing to take part in government business, the enclave's inhabitants lived, gossiped, argued, and plotted amongst themselves, completely irrelevant to the Axis war effort, and increasingly fearful for their own futures as the Allied armies closed in on Sigmaringen. On the 1st of April 1945, Free French forces had crossed the river Rhine into Germany, advancing across Germany south of the Danube, linking up with US forces on the way. On the 21st of April at Sigmaringen, the remaining French still in residence lowered the French flag and tried to leave, following the hundreds who had already fled as the Allies approached. The following day, Free French troops arrived and captured Sigmaringen without any problems, raising their own flag atop the castle. Of the most prominent Vichy officials, all faced justice as traitors and collaborators. Marshal Pétain was placed on trial on the order of the Provisional French Government, the proceedings opening on the 23rd of July 1945. On the 15th of August, Pétain was found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. Though due to his status as a French national hero from World War I, this was immediately commuted to life imprisonment. He died in 1951, aged 95. Pierre Laval had fled, attempting to enter the tiny Principality of Liechtenstein, which was adjacent to Switzerland but was refused entry by this neutral nation. The Americans captured him and handed him over to the Free French. Found guilty by a French court of treason, he was shot by firing squad on the 15th of October 1945. Joseph d'Arnaud fled to Murano in northern Italy and was there captured by the British, who likewise handed him over to the Free French. Found guilty of collaboration with the enemy, d'Arnaud was executed by firing squad on the 10th of October 1945. Other Vichy officials were executed or faced long terms of imprisonment, and some managed to escape, many of them fleeing to fascist Spain. So ended the sorry story of the French enclave in Nazi Germany and its band of collaborators, renegades, and desperados. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.